Okay, I think I'm recording. And yes, indeed, I am. Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa. And I assume many of you noticed that episode 80 of Question and Answer was not on YouTube last weekend, or rather, it was for about an hour and then was promptly taken down by the powers that be at YouTube because I violated what is it? One of their policies with regard to a certain subject. I spoke certain things that are verboten on YouTube in answer to a question that I was asked. And I guess it is appropriate. The person who asked the question on BitChute. And BitChute did get the uncensored version. I'm going to put up a censored version of Q&A 80 right before I put up this, so they'll both come up on Sunday. But if you want to see the uncensored version, and I mean in future you just want to watch these videos on a platform other than YouTube, they are up on BitChute. And the bright side of the whole thing that happened last weekend is that it inspired me to start uploading onto Rumble. So I'm now on Rumble too. So even though some of my videos do get like censored on YouTube, or I just can't put them up on YouTube because too much freedom of speech on the video. So, I mean, you can watch them on BitChute and Rumble. So it's partly my own fault because I thought that the subject I was talking about was now, I mean, you were still able to talk about it, or they relaxed their censorship on that topic. But I was confused in my head because it turns out that it's a certain election that now you can talk about. You can question the integrity of a certain election. I mean, you can question the integrity of, it used to be, you could question the integrity of any election that ever happened in the history of the world except one. And now you can question the integrity of that one also on YouTube, or so I have been led to understand. But apparently the powers that be just assumed or figured, all right, that's in the past, that's behind us, it's no longer dangerous. So, just let people pretend like they got freedom of speech on YouTube by talking about that. But apparently this other subject that I was talking about isn't considered to be just behind us. It's still an ongoing thing, and who knows what kind of tentacles of it are like reaching out into the future for us to encounter in the future. It may be that we got more in store along those lines. So I assume that's why you still can't talk about one certain topic. And just a second, will you stop it? Okay. The dogs are whimpering because my sweetheart wants them in this room so that you can see how cute they are, but they'd rather be hanging out in the larger part of the house, or at least one of them would. So anyways, getting back to sort of the preamble to this video, and there's really not a lot of questions this time, partly because the usual place where people would submit questions is in the previous Q&A, which on YouTube, as I've already mentioned, was taken down within about an hour, probably just because of AI screening the video. Maybe, who knows, maybe somebody as soon as the video came up, they just pounced and started like looking for stuff to complain about. But probably, I think it was just an automatic filter kind of a thing. And you got to bear in mind that YouTube is part of Google. They're owned by the same mega corporation. I think it's a subsidiary of Google, and Google, as most of us know, really, I mean, just consider that AI chatbot that made like artificial intelligence generated pictures just recently. And it turned out that it was almost incapable of making a picture of a white man. Even George Washington, somebody asked for a picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware. They created 4 pictures. All 4 of them was a black George Washington. They asked for a picture of a pope, black pope. They asked for pictures of Vikings. It was all like Asian women. I mean, it was just, they could not. In fact, there was one person on this Genesis AI program that requested a picture produced in the style of Norman Rockwell. And they got a response saying that the AI refused to do a picture in the style of Norman Rockwell because Norman Rockwell idealized American life. And there are just certain ugly facts like lack of diversity that, because Norman Rockwell's style idealized America back in like the 40s and 50s, I mean, they just refused to even imitate Norman Rockwell's painting style because, of course, he mostly painted white people. So you just bear in mind that the same company runs YouTube. And I mean, oh, what did I just do? I clicked the wrong thing here. Okay, we're still recording, I'm pretty sure. Yes, we are. So, I mean, the Google search and also YouTube searches are doing the same kind of thing in more subtle ways as this fiasco of the Genesis chatbot that got taken down promptly just because it was just so blatant what Google was trying to do, or at least the people who created this chatbot. But Google, we may assume, has the same general aims and goals, overarching attitudes, so that, I mean, YouTube does not escape from that. YouTube is not a free speech platform. So I hope I didn't just get another video taken down by saying that, although for some reason bad-mouthing YouTube, just pointing out that really it is not a free speech platform, is allowable on YouTube as far as I know. So I guess I should just start answering questions here. And the first one is from Gaz. And Gaz says, hello, thank you for providing information on Buddhism. It has helped me greatly in my understanding. Question, recently I have been casually enjoying games of Kabaddi. I had heard that the Buddha played an early form of it before his enlightenment, but I have been unable to find a source. Do you know anything about this? I imagine that he would have played such a sport. Just curious if there are any mentions of it in the suttas or elsewhere. His playing of the game was also depicted in the film Little Buddha. Well, I'd never really heard of Kabaddi, but it turns out that it is a sport that has its origins in ancient times, presumably in northern India. And it's like two teams on a field, and one person from one side has to run onto the side of the other team and tag as many of the people on the other team as he can without getting tackled, and then run back to his own side again. That is pretty much the extent of my knowledge of this game, and even that may be inaccurate. But I really haven't read in the Pali texts anything about the Buddha, like before he was the Buddha, before he became enlightened, when he was still, a layperson playing this game. It may be that it's not called Kabaddi in Pali or anything resembling Kabaddi, and it may be on the list in the Sila Khanda of the Digha Nikaya. Like the first many suttas of the Digha Nikaya have these long lists of things that monks don't do, and it includes playing games and engaging in certain sports activities and so forth. So if it is mentioned in the Pali text, it would probably be there, and I don't remember it being there. So really, there's no way of knowing for sure what the Buddha did before he became enlightened, or before he renounced the world, became a great philosopher and ascetic, a great samana. Because all we really have, for the most part, is legends. And so we may be able to verify that there is a legend that he played Kabaddi or some sport similar to Kabaddi. But, there's no way of really knowing for sure such details of his life. Even like the names involved in his family, like his wife's name and his parents' names and so forth. it's largely legends. I have read that nowhere in the Pali texts themselves is the Buddha's wife specifically named Yasodhara, for example. That it's just sort of a tradition that may be true and may not be true. I think the Buddha's wife has like 2 or 3 different names that are mentioned. So, yeah, I mean, I really can't help you with regard to verifying that the Buddha played a sport called Kabaddi before he renounced the world and was still a layperson. So, yeah. I mean, he may have done it, but I don't know. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana. And Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana says, from the various non-Buddhist traditions mentioned in the suttas at the time of the Buddha, which one do you find the most intriguing or wise? And how do you compare or rate them to the later Buddhist traditions like Theravada, Mahayana, etc.? Well, most of what I know about other non-Buddhist traditions, a lot of it is from the Buddhist texts, and you can't really learn much about like Jainism or the Ajivaka religious system or other systems from reading what it says about them in the Pali texts, mainly because the Pali texts really portray these other people like Mahavira, the great Jain teacher, as essentially charlatans and fools. That it's really not trying to portray them accurately so much as they're indulging in a bit of pro-Buddhist and anti-non-Buddhist propaganda. Although I have read about Jainism, I've read some Jain sutras, and of course I've read a lot of early Vedic stuff. So let's see. Oh, I should mention that the disease that I caught, the virus that escaped from some laboratory or some such that I had almost no resistance to, is now down, is just vestigial. It's like my lungs are just like recovering. I think I'm pretty much better now. And I better check on the dogs again. Yeah, you guys be good. Yeah, lick each other. That's good. Okay. So, of the religions that I know, I mean, Jainism is kind of interesting just because it's so strange in certain ways. Like I've read in a Jain text itself that a Jain monk, if he's going to cross a river and there's no bridge and there's no regular ferry going back and forth across, he can only cross if he can get onto a boat that was going to cross anyway. Regardless, if the boat was going to cross just for his sake, he's not allowed to get on the boat because that would make karma. And Jains are trying to exhaust their karma. They're trying to let their karma run out without making any new karma. And so getting a ride across a river on a boat from a person who's just offering to take you across just because he wants to take you across, you can't do it. So the monk gets on this boat and the boat starts to sink. What is he supposed to do? He's not supposed to help bail out the boat because that would make karma. So what he's supposed to do is, if he belongs to a sect that wears clothing, he's supposed to take off his clothes, fold them up, and put them on top of his head. Because when the owner of the boat or somebody else gets mad at him for not helping to bail out the boat and throws him overboard, then his clothes won't get wet because they'll be on top of his head. And I actually read this in a Jain text. It's not like some kind of anti-Jain propaganda mocking or ridiculing Jainism. So the various non-Buddhist traditions mentioned in the suttas at the time of the Buddha, which do you find the most intriguing or wise? I would guess probably just like the Vedic tradition, like the Jatilas, the matted hair ascetics who were Brahmins who worshiped the sacred fire out in the forest. I'm not exactly sure what they were doing out there besides attending the sacred fire, but I assume at least some of them were getting into Upanishadic teachings and practicing serious meditation and so forth. And the Buddha really did not mock the Vedic traditions very much. he he had a certain respect for them, like a Vedic Brahmanist, proto-Hindu that wanted to convert to Buddhism or wanted to become a monk. He wouldn't have to go through a probationary period like many others do, because the Hindus, the proto-Hindus at that time, believed in karma. They were Kamavadins, and so that was good enough. That meant that you were inclined not to just be a raging heretic if you were ordained without going through a probationary period. There is one teacher, Sanjaya Belatthiputta, who somebody asked about him. I think it was on YouTube. And then, as happens on YouTube, another reason why you might do well to watch Rumble or BitChute instead is that comments just have this way of mysteriously disappearing from underneath my YouTube videos. And so somebody asked about one of the 6 heretical teachers, one of the group, I don't know what you call them, sort of 6 contemporaries of the Buddha who are also teachers of spiritual or philosophical systems. They were not Vedic. And somebody asked about that, and I'll get to that one later. But I think Sanjaya Belatthiputta also probably had some wisdom. I mean, the Buddha's 2 chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, were disciples of Sanjaya before they became disciples of the Buddha. So he must have had some wisdom to him. But I'll get to that eventually. So, I mean, of the other non-Buddhist traditions mentioned in the suttas, probably like late Upanishadic Vedism, that would probably be like my second choice after Buddhism. I'm definitely not a Jain. I really don't. There's certain aspects of Jainism, even though superficially they might be similar to Buddhists. Certain aspects I think are not all that wise. But that's just me. I mean, it's just maybe a matter of temperament. And the sun is now shining. It was overcast when I first started doing this, and I'm getting these weird, surreal lines across my face. So I think I'm going to try and fix this. Not even funny. Okay. That's an improvement, I think. So yeah, let's just say Upanishadic Vedism. So I'll just move on to Siovak and Sipad Zidrna's next question here, which is, in many parts of life, it's easiest to make quick gains in the beginning of learning a skill, but hard to master. So even though it may seem like we are making extreme progress in the beginning, we fall in a rut later on. An example would be training in a sport where training initially makes quick gains, but then it becomes exponentially more difficult. However, in other skills like mathematics, the more you know, the easier it is to learn more of that skill. For example, when we start learning math, it takes forever to understand basic addition. But as we go into deep mathematics, we learn more in 1 month than we did in years when we started. When comparing the Buddhist practice, which kind of progress do we make on this path? I think to some degree, it goes both ways. You can make both kinds of progress. Like, for example, meditation might be very difficult at first, and then it starts getting easier. But then in a way, it also gets harder too. So it's like difficult, then easy, and then difficult again. At least for some people like me. Yeah, I think probably the first type is most representative of Buddhist practice, where when you first start meditating, you've got all this junk, I mean, just like debris in your mind that can get cleared away pretty easily once you set your mind to it. Once you get the idea that you should like clean up your mind, then you can do that and you make really good progress. But then eventually you get down to the bedrock. It's like these like personality traits that you're not fully aware of, or just stuff that's maybe has a genetic component that it's not so easy just to let it go, to reprogram that. So yeah, that's kind of the way it works is, it might be difficult at the beginning, just learning how to meditate and, getting past the wandering mind stage. And then you start making good progress. And it's relatively easy progress once you learn how to meditate, just because you've got all this deadwood and this junk that is you can clear out fairly easily. But then you start getting into, like I said, it's like just the bedrock of delusion and just these ingrained personality traits, many of which are not particularly skillful or wholesome, that then you really it's difficult. In fact, it's very difficult if you don't have a teacher. You have to be really insightful and just wide awake, and maybe not have very deep defilements to begin with, if to do it without a teacher, because it's very difficult for people to see themselves the way others see them, or to see yourself objectively, so that you have certain flaws, certain defilements that either you don't see them or you justify them. You don't see them as defilements, even though other people do, including maybe your teachers, but you just don't see it that way. You'll justify it, you'll rationalize it, whatever. So yeah, once you get to a certain point, it can get much more difficult, just because you're starting to get into like reprogramming how your character works, how your personality works, or at least trying to transcend that, trying to at least hold it at bay enough that you can get to a level where it doesn't really matter that much anymore, where you can sort of rise above it. It's still there because to some degree you're just born with it. A lot of it is genetic, or it's just ingrained by the time you're 3 years old. And so there's not a whole lot you're going to do unless you just have some just wild, radical insight that just completely changes the way you perceive reality. So yeah, I would say it starts easy and gets harder. Although certain other things, they might start hard and then get easier, especially, when you're at the intermediate level. So it might be the beginning level is hard, intermediate level is easy, smooth sailing for the most part. And then you get into the advanced level, it starts getting hard again. So I guess I answered that question, and it's going to be different for different people. I think I mentioned in a recent Q&A that in the suttas themselves, it talks about like the 4 kinds of progress you can make in Dhamma, or in spirituality in general. There's slow and difficult, slow and easy, fast and difficult, and fast and easy. And some of my progress was slow and difficult, I have to admit. So I think I'll just move on to Siovak and Sipad Zidana's next question here, which is, what is the difference between wisdom and insight? And I think, there's a lot of overlap, and at certain respects, there's synonyms. But insight, or vipassana, the context of that, or the implication, the connotation of it, is that it's something that arises, and then it can add to your wisdom, but it's something that arises through either meditation or just through some peculiar circumstances that just kind of jolt you into being more awake. So wisdom in general is, I would consider wisdom to be, it's a difficult word to define. Partly, but just because it has different levels, there are different meanings to the same word. You look in a dictionary, each word doesn't just have one meaning. So, at the highest level, wisdom would be seeing reality. Even though Siovak and Sipad Zidana on the Discord server was arguing for hours about how, this kind of denying that like an arahant sees reality, that kind of a thing, or just saying that even a deluded fool sees reality in certain respects and so forth. But we needn't wade into that. But at a more basic level, like a more beginning level, wisdom is more like discerning the difference between right and wrong, discerning the difference between skillful and unskillful, wholesome and unwholesome. That would be sort of conventional wisdom. And then you get into more of the ultimate wisdom, and that would be seeing reality. So insight, on the other hand, it's more like something that happens to you as a result of your practice, or as I say, just as a result of some strange circumstance. Maybe it could be paramis from a past life, momentum going in a certain direction or something that finally gets you to this point where something just clicks or something just breaks and falls away or whatever. And then you have this like a flash of wisdom or a surge of wisdom. But yeah, you could say that all insight is wisdom, but not all wisdom is necessarily insight, especially if you consider insight to be something that arises, as a result of something. Generally, in the text, it would be as a result of meditative practice. So I think I'll just move on to the next question. And this is the question I was referring to earlier. I don't remember who asked the question. It might have even been like an early fast question on Q&A 80 that then got taken down off YouTube so that all the comments were also poofed out of existence. But anyway, they were asking me about the philosophy of Sanjaya Belatthiputta. And it's really hard to say for sure what he was teaching because, of course, our main information about Sanjaya Belatthiputta is in Buddhist texts that, of course, don't want to portray Sanjaya as, like a sage. They want to portray him as essentially a clown. I mean, like the six main philosophers that are always mentioned or often mentioned as a group, which includes Niganta Nataputta or Mahavira. And even calling him Nataputta in the text, like Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, or the reputed founder of Jainism, he's called Nataputta in the text, which means something like son of grandson. It's just kind of like a silly name that makes him look silly. And Sanjaya Belatthiputta was another one. And in the text, he's considered to be an eel wriggler, where you cannot pin him down to giving a straight answer with regard to anything philosophical. And so a lot of people have come to the conclusion that Sanjaya was a skeptic, like in the Pyrrhonistic, classical Greek sense of skepticism, where you just go for ataraxia, just peace of mind caused by just not trying to figure out reality. You can't know reality by thinking about it, so you just stop trying to figure it out. And then it results in this peace of mind. It may be that that's what Sanjaya was teaching. And he may have been a skeptic, which then leads to the issue that a lot of people consider the Buddha to be a skeptic or to have been a skeptic. And I really don't think that the Buddha was a skeptic. There are certain questions he would not answer. And also in early texts like the Atthakavagga, he's saying, don't believe anything, have no view, no perception, just pounding away at that, which could be called skepticism, but I don't think it was skepticism, because a skeptic says you can't know reality. I mean, the only thing a skeptic can know is that he can't know anything, which is kind of a contradiction. But the Buddha wasn't saying you can't know anything. He was just saying that you can't really know anything by thinking about it. It's not going to be at the level of intellect that you understand reality. I mean, you can know useful conventional stuff that can help get you closer to knowing reality. But ultimately, the Buddha was a mystic, in my opinion. In fact, he was a very pure mystic. Some mysticism, you read it, and it's not very pure mysticism because it still has all this content. They're going into details of describing the mysticism, and there's all this content to it, which really means that it's not pure mysticism, because pure mysticism would just be formless and wide open. It's just immediate awareness or experience of reality, which is not a multiplicity. But getting back to Sanjaya Belatthiputta, that's really all that I know about him. That's all that most people know about him. Assuming that he wrote anything, it doesn't exist anymore unless it's under the ground somewhere. It hasn't been dug up yet. His tradition went extinct, and so really there's no living tradition. There's no texts that I know of from his tradition. And so all we know about Sanjaya Belatthiputta is what his opponents said about him. And that is really, if that's all you've got, then you have to try to use that if you want to understand something. But you have to always bear in mind that there's a bias against him. And I think he was one of the teachers who vomited hot blood and died just because his disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, left him and went and converted to Buddhism. I think according to tradition, he vomited hot blood and died right then and there, just because two of his favorite disciples left him and joined the new Buddhist sect, which I think is probably not very likely. There were a number of them who did that. I think Mahavira, the founder of the Jains, is also considered to have vomited hot blood and died just because some of his supporters converted to Buddhism. Also, Devadatta supposedly vomited hot blood and died, and then he just plunged right down into the bottom pits of Vici hell after he finally failed in getting a schism in Buddhism going. So, yeah, what people know about the philosophy of Sanjaya Belatthiputta is very limited, and it's largely conjecture. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. And the person who asked this on BitChute, they don't have a name. It's just 4 groups of 6 dots. 6 dots, 6 dots, 6 dots, 6 dots, like on a domino or something. So anyway, the 4 groups of 6 dots says, I asked this question to you on YouTube, but they deleted my comments. Yeah, welcome to the club. And won't let me ask anything. I think, in my personal opinion, non-existence, blowing out, is very scary. I want to reincarnate, and I don't want Christian heaven, a retirement for the dead. I want to choose life, reincarnation, all the blessing and curses that come with it. But at the same time, I do find some of the things said in Buddhism is interesting, but I would rather be born amongst the gods or have a good Ishikai adventure. And I don't know what an Ishikai adventure is. Do people get to have a choice in this matter when they move past this life if their karma is good and not all muddled up with doing harm and evil to others? Well, in Buddhism, or at least in Theravada Buddhism, as a general rule, you don't have a choice as to what you're going to, what existence you're going to wind up in after this one. That it's going to be just a matter of your karma and your karma, and your karma knows better than you do, in a sense, where you need to be. It's just you wind up where you need to be in order to work out your karma. So in Buddhism, it's considered to be pretty much automatic. Although Ram Dass, who was more Hindu than anything else, in one of his early books was talking about how people may be able to choose, except it's not your current ego that's choosing. It's like a higher aspect of yourself that is aware of all of your lives. Let's say after you die, you're just like reviewing your lives, your lives, your past lives, and kind of seeing what your situation is. And then Ram Dass was saying something like, well, it seems like what I need to be next would be like a black prostitute who's murdered in a back alley at the age of 18. Okay, here we go. We're doing it. And, then you just take the next life, and you get, you have an abusive mother, and your father is nowhere to be seen, and you become a prostitute, get addicted to drugs, and get stabbed to death in an alley when you're 18. And at that level, when you're choosing, I mean, you're choosing for spiritual reasons. You're not choosing because you just want to take it easy and live in a palace with a harem of celestial nymphs and fountains and flowers all around you. So, yeah, it's not like the ego at this level of reality that is making the choice with regard to how you get reborn. So it's still a matter of, what do I need? What does my karma need? What do I need to work on in order to get closer? And I think closer to the goal, closer to enlightenment. And I think most beings really are not that advanced. After a turtle dies, I don't think that it's going to be reviewing its past lives and choosing to be reborn as a lizard or something. Maybe another turtle. So, yeah, in Buddhism, or at least in Theravada Buddhism, it is considered to be essentially automatic. It's just where you need to be. The most appropriate place for you to be reborn is where you're reborn. Although I guess some Hindus have the idea that, you have like a higher self that is actually able to make choices, but it's not going to be choices just to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, because they pretty much have to arise in equal measure just for the universe to stay in balance. All the pluses and minuses have to balance out in the long run. So, I mean, it's more a matter of just taking care of your karmic issues, which is kind of one reason why like crippled people and to some degree insane people traditionally in India are viewed as beloved of the gods, because they are really doing the heavy lifting. They're doing the heavy karmic resolution stuff. So let's see here, 4 groups of 6 dots says he would rather be born amongst the gods. But yeah, I think most people would. I mean, at least at the intellectual level. But then again, deep down, we're born really where we belong. And it's like I've talked about before, how according to tradition, this is mentioned in Letty Seato's The Manuals of Buddhism, which is really an interesting book for those of you who are interested in more like technical Buddhist philosophy. Letty Seato, spelled Ledi. And, he's talking about how the material universe gets destroyed periodically, usually by fire. And then all the beings in this material universe have to go up into this very exalted heaven realm, where you've got swamis and meditators and yogis that are striving to get into this heaven realm and just can't do it. But now all of a sudden everybody has to go there because there's nowhere else to go. They have to wait until the next material universe like re-evolves before they can come back down. And they just hate it there. It's just so boring. It's just so refined. They want to have a good time. They want to just, get into trouble and all this stuff that, they just, as soon as the material universe re-evolves, they just abandon this heaven realm like rats abandoning a sinking ship. And really, there are people, I think pretty much everyone to some degree, where, you got to have a certain amount of problems and difficulties and trouble, or else you're just bored. Or if everything's just too easy, it's just boredom. So, yeah. So I can certainly relate to, you'd rather be in a heaven realm amongst the gods than, be working in a plywood mill, or, be a homeless person, like a homeless, like drug addicted person in the West, not a homeless wanderer in the East, or, be a mangy dog in an Indian village or something. Obviously most people would pick the celestial mansions and so forth, but it really doesn't work that way, because it's not the superficial ego part of your mind that's deciding where you're going to go. That in Buddhism, it's essentially will. It's like Schopenhauer's will that is like landing you where you need to be, or at least, I guess where you need to be would be an appropriate way of saying it. But even if you go with the more Hindu idea that you do have a choice, the choice is not going to be always choosing what is nicest and most pleasant. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Jeremy. And Jeremy says, is your banned YouTube video available on Rumble? How do I find it on Rumble? And I might as well tell you that my new Rumble channel is, my handle is politically incorrect Dharma, all one word. So you should be able to find it that way. So yeah, I've only got 2 videos up on it right now. One was a video, my sweetheart set me up with an account like 2 years ago and just put this short little clip just to have something up, on my channel. And that was like 2 years ago. And I wasn't even fully aware of it, or at least I'd forgotten about it until I uploaded the notorious banned Q&A 80 last Sunday. Just finally just got motivated, which is a good thing. I mean, that's like the bright side of this whole YouTube situation. So yeah, I'm on Rumble and my handle is politically incorrect Dharma. And I already have a handful of subscribers. And the Q&A got a few dozen views, despite the fact that it was the very first one that I'd ever put up on Rumble. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Lieberlam. And Lieberlam says, if you had to guess, what was the longest stretch of time you've gone without others meddling with your mindfulness? That is to say, if we call alms round non-interruption, but something like showing thanks or having a conversation interruptions. Well, that's kind of a hard question. I mean, in Buddhism, the Buddha set up the Sangha so that they couldn't become complete hermits. They always had to interact with lay people. They had to go into the village every morning to get food if they wanted to eat that day. So, alms round was generally the greatest threat to one's equanimity and mindfulness of the entire day. If alms round is ugly, the whole rest of the day can be ugly. Let's see here. The longest stretch of time I've gone without others meddling with my mindfulness. That's kind of a weird question. It would have had to have been when I was a junior monk, because as I got to be a more senior monk, I started getting more famous and would start having visitors a lot. And even if I would just hide in my cave and refuse to come out and meet with them, still they were interfering with my mindfulness by like banging on the door or calling out and this kind of thing. But even when I was a junior monk, I was still the exotic foreigner, and I was stricter than most monks. So I was considered to be like this heavy hitter of an exotic foreign monk that lots of people wanted to see me. And I'd put up fences and stuff around my cave just to prevent people from coming to see me. But still they'd be out there, calling out and so forth. Even if I didn't come out, then, still they'd be, in a way, meddling with my mindfulness, so to speak. So it's hard to say. Just a few days probably at most would be the longest I went without having some kind of interaction, like conversation type interaction with other people. But it's just something that you have to learn to incorporate into your practice, that you can't just insist on total peace and solitude, because it just doesn't work that way. Like in Burma, if you're going to be within walking distance to a village, which you have to be in order to go for alms, then you're also going to be within easy hearing distance of loudspeakers, like village loudspeakers that are blasting, monks chanting starting at like 4 a.m, or they're blasting cheesy pop music, or they're just making announcements. And there's always going to be that kind of stuff. You cannot really insist on just everything being perfect, because the world just isn't designed that way. One of the reasons why we're here, in a manner of speaking, is to learn how to deal with all the bullshit, to learn how to accept it with equanimity rather than avoiding it or, struggling against it or anything like that. That you have to be in harmony, kind of a Taoist kind of a thing. You have to be in harmony with the universe in order to abandon it or transcend it. That struggling against it just makes things worse. So, really, like if you insist on solitude, then it may be the best thing for you is to have to learn how to deal with visitors all the time. Like I've been told that Ajahn Chah, if he had a disciple who really just did not like dealing with people, he'd send him to some monastery in town where he'd have to deal with people all the time. Or if he had a disciple who really was a gregarious kind of social sort of person that hated being alone, he'd send them out alone. Or if he was afraid of ghosts, he'd send them to a cemetery, that kind of thing. Because you have to learn how to deal with the things that you hate the most and the things that you love the most. Those are like the main things that keep cropping up in your life as a result of karma, that you have to keep dealing with it until you learn how to do it right. Sort of like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. He has to keep doing over and over and over until finally he can do it selflessly with acceptance. So I guess I answered that question. I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha asked the interesting question, do you have personal criticism against Buddhism? And I mean, it depends on what you mean by Buddhism. If I don't have personal criticism against what the Buddha originally taught, like genuine original Buddhism, but then again, I can't really be absolutely sure what genuine original Buddhism was, because you just have to like deduce what the original teachings were. I'm not a dogmatist. I'm not the kind of person that's just going to accept the entire Tipitaka as just verbatim teachings of the Buddha. So, do I have personal criticism against Buddhism? Golly, well, I mean, there's like different kinds of Buddhism, different interpretations of Buddhism. I think a lot of my viewers would know fairly well that I've got personal criticisms against like left-wing Western woke Buddhism. That's just essentially cultural Marxism with some Buddhist flavoring added. Or also, like when I was still a monk in Burma and hadn't even been introduced to all the weirdness in the West, or hadn't been introduced to very much of it anyway, I had a personal criticism against just unquestioning dogmatism. Like the Burmese, bless their hearts, they're good people, and but nevertheless, they have like a medieval approach to Buddhism where they cannot question any of it. If it's in the Tipitaka, it has to be true. If it's in the commentaries, it has to be true. They just cannot bring themselves psychologically to question it. And I mean, I used to wonder if it was possible for a Burmese person to become enlightened. Like a lot of Burmese people will think that only Burmese people can really become enlightened because everyone else has wrong view to some degree. But I used to wonder, if it was possible for the Burmese, because they were so rigid and dogmatic in their approach to Buddhism, that I wondered if they had enough freedom from just the constraints of the dogma to really break free of that. But I assume some of them do. You think about some of the medieval Catholic saints that also had like this really dogmatic, rigid kind of approach to their religion, but nevertheless, just through innate talent or parami or whatever, they were able to rise above that. It's just down at the surface, it's kind of down at ground level. They were still, dogmatic religious people, but still, that wasn't the only level to their spirituality. And the higher levels were just kind of beyond that. When you're in a deep mystical state, you're not dogmatizing, you're not thinking about that kind of stuff. So I do have personal criticisms against certain kinds of Buddhism. I do have personal criticisms with regard to Theravada Buddhism as it exists today, and just as it existed once the Pali Tipitaka was finalized, because I do not consider all of it, or even really half of it, to accurately represent what the Buddha taught. So, I mean, you can call that personal criticisms against Buddhism, but I mean, I'm not really antagonistic towards Dhamma in general. I certainly have no criticisms against Gotama Buddha, the founder of the Buddhist tradition, or the founder of all Buddhist traditions, even the ones who really don't care about Gotama Buddha anymore. So I guess so. But yeah, I'm not, it's kind of a broad question. I could just sit here and sort of criticize certain aspects of certain kinds of Buddhism for an hour straight, probably. But I won't. And I'm just going to move on to the next question here. And this is from Crave Minerals. And Crave Minerals says, how do people get psychic powers? I've heard some say that they can spontaneously arise when one is mastering deep meditation. It would make sense to me that they develop lifetime after lifetime like any other skill rather than out of the blue. But what do you think? And then in parentheses, he says, telepathy actually sounds bothersome. So, yeah, the standard orthodox Theravada Buddhist explanation for how monks or spiritual practitioners get psychic powers is mainly through practicing samatha meditation, like jhana. If you master jhana, you can get psychic powers. That a monk or a person who becomes enlightened just through vipassana without mastering jhana, they're called a dry-visioned arahant. They don't have psychic powers, but still they're enlightened. They just have the one psychic power of being enlightened, essentially. But that's not the only way of getting psychic powers. I think some people are just born with psychic talent. And then, of course, you've got like witches and so forth that have ways of generating psychic powers. And it's my understanding of psychic powers is really that, I mean, anything is possible. Miracles, so-called, are possible. That the laws of physics, so-called, can be broken. But most people are just locked in to this, I don't know what you call it, almost like a rigid system of beliefs, and including beliefs of what they consider to be possible. And I mean, it's pretty much necessary for us to exist. I mean, in a dream, for example, you can get onto a bus, and then at some point, the bus turns into an airplane or a ship. And it's not like you got off the bus and onto the airplane or the ship. It's just that the whole thing turns into that. And there might be like a moment or two of, oh, that's weird. And then you just continue going with the dream. Or you're walking along talking to, some old friend of yours from high school. And then they just, while you're sitting there, while you're walking along talking to them, they turn into some like famous actor or something. And it's not like one person left and the other one came. It's just in a dream, there's all these weird possibilities that as a general rule are not possible in this world. And it's not possible in this world just because the world would just fall apart. You don't have enough law and order to keep it together, to hold it in a stable state. So we have to have a certain amount of stability to keep our world more or less predictable and just holding it together so it doesn't just disintegrate. But some people are liminal, which is a word I learned just a few years ago. And it's like they have more flexibility with regard to the stability and structure of this world that they are generating. I mean, we're creating our own reality. It's not that this is like the physical, material, objective world, and we are just meat organisms living in this world just through some strange epiphenomenon of electrochemical activity in a gray blob of meat that we're thinking and having desires and dreams and so forth. That's kind of the standard point of view for people in the West, including most Buddhist people in the West. But still, that's not really what Buddhism teaches. And I just don't believe it. In fact, I'm unorthodox, even from a Theravada point of view, mainly because I'm not as materialistic as Orthodox Theravada is. I'm really not a materialist. I do not think that physical matter is ultimately real. So, getting back to psychic powers, some people, they just have more liminality, more flexibility to this structure that they're living in. And it may be you're just born that way. It may be that you cultivate it through meditation, or it may be like witches do, at least some witches, where they will generate sort of weak spots in the structure that they're living in by flouting like taboos. They'll do things that people aren't supposed to do, just as a way of sort of weakening the structure that they're living in, weakening the structure that's holding everything together, that allows like essentially magic to happen. Things that shouldn't be possible become more possible just through their efforts to just weaken the structure of human existence in certain ways, to make like windows or gaps that can allow the infinite possibilities into this version of reality. Because the infinite possibilities are always there. I mean, even physics deals with that to some degree. It's like a subatomic particle, like an electron, doesn't just go from point A to point B along one route. It goes by an infinite number of routes. It goes by every possible route. And then it's just somehow our perceiving mind just like focuses on one of those possibilities and like collapses the state vector, so-called. And all the other possibilities are still there. It's just that we get locked into one of those possibilities. And it's of necessity. We have really no choice. We have to have structure and stability in order for this world to exist for more than a trillionth of a second. There has to be rules. But there are ways of bending the rules, in a sense, or just exploiting gaps between the rules. And you can do that through cultivating that, or just sort of like, I guess what a sage does, like a meditating sage, is they're just weakening their grasp, their clinging to this world, which then allows for more possibilities. They're no longer completely stuck in this version of reality because they are loosening their attachments to it so that other possibilities become available. Or if you're just born with psychic talent, it's kind of that way too. Whereas like the wizard types and the witch types, they have to like deliberately generate sort of weaknesses in the structure so that the infinite possibilities, or the possibilities they prefer, can somehow get in through the cracks. So that's my theory. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from White Ash Piper, who, I might add, is one of my first subscribers on Rumble. And White Ash Piper says, okay, Grasshopper, aka Kwai Chang Cain, what sage or mystic head would you say that he would best represent if he wasn't a fictional character? So, I mean, at first it seems like, oh, he's not necessarily calling me Kwai Chang Cain. And I've got a dog snoring loudly behind me now. So he's just saying, okay, Grasshopper, aka Kwai Chang Cain. So, I mean, that could be interpreted two ways. It could be that he's calling me that, which would be answering his own question, maybe. But he says, what sage or mystic head would you say that he would best represent if he wasn't a fictional character? And that's a tough one. I mean, probably it may be that most of you are not old enough to remember the old TV show Kung Fu. But it was about a man played by David Carradine who grows up in China in the mid-1800s. His father was American and his mother was Chinese. So he was a half-breed. He was half Chinese, half European. And then his entire family died. So because of that, largely because of that, he goes to a Shaolin Buddhist monastery in 19th century China, gets admitted to be a Shaolin monk. And then at one point as he's a Shaolin monk. It was the full moon of May. It's Buddha Day, the most auspicious day of the year for a Buddhist. He's at this, I think he's like at the Forbidden City or something. There's some kind of festival going on. And his beloved teacher, Master Po, gets shot by the imperial nephew, the nephew of the emperor. And Kwai Chang, he just goes into a rage. He loses it because, his beloved master just got shot in cold blood by this aristocrat. So he just grabs a spear and harpoons the imperial nephew. So he's parajika. He is expelled from the Sangha, so to speak. And he has to flee to America where, of course, he's, interacting with bad cowboys and people, saying stuff like, Chinaman, I'm going to blow your head off. That kind of stuff. So with regard to that, what person can I think of that is not a fictional character that most closely resembles the life of Kwai Chang Cain? I don't know anybody who closely resembles that. I only know one person who was a monk who was expelled from the Sangha for being parajika. But it wasn't because he murdered somebody. We don't need to get into that. And I'm not going to go into details. But and in other respects, he didn't resemble Kwai Chang Cain at all. Kwai Chang Cain also was a master at Kung Fu. But I don't really know any of those. And with regard to, the Buddhist monk from an Eastern culture who then comes back and is interacting with his Native Americans or with Americans, it might even be me. Maybe this is what White Ash Piper is asking. I mean, my mother used to say that I resembled David Carradine when I was younger. So I kind of looked like him. Plus, just the aspect of being a Buddhist monk in Asia who then comes back to America and becomes like a manual laborer. Like in the pilot episode of Kung Fu, Kwai Chang Cain, he's working on the railroad, So in that respect, I kind of resemble Kwai Chang Cain. But in other respects, I'm not a master at Kung Fu fighting. And I didn't get kicked out of the Sangha for murdering somebody. In fact, I didn't get kicked out of the Sangha at all. So, yeah, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I think I might be the one person that I can think of that I have any familiarity with that might most closely resemble Kwai Chang Cain, except without the Kung Fu and, murdering the emperor's nephew and all that. But maybe there's some other ex-monks, Western monks. You pretty much have to be a Westerner to resemble Kwai Chang Cain because he was at least half American and he went back to America. He's played by like a guy of European ancestry. So, yeah, I guess, just for lack of knowing of anyone who comes closer, I'd say I guess it would be me. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Austin. If anyone can think of someone who comes closer to being Kwai Chang Cain than me, just feel free to put it in the comments. I won't be shamed at all because I really don't resemble him extremely closely, except in certain limited respects. So getting back to Austin here, Austin's question is, was there ever a time when, as a monk, all doubts about the Buddhist teachings disappeared for you? Yeah, there were lots of times when all doubts about the Buddhist teachings disappeared for me, like when I was sound asleep, or when I was in a deep meditative state, when you're just not thinking, or, even if you're thinking a little bit, when you're thinking, breathing in, breathing out, that kind of a thing. You're not having any doubts about the Buddhist teachings. It's only when you're sitting there philosophizing, maybe you're reading a text and you're thinking, wow, is this really true? Then you might be having doubts about the Buddhist teachings. But then again, it's hard to say exactly what the Buddha really taught, because as I mentioned earlier, I don't consider the Pali Tipitaka or any set of Buddhist texts to be just verbatim transcripts of what the Buddha really taught, just quotes. There's some in there, but for the most part, it would be like loose paraphrase and just made up stuff that maybe the Buddha would agree with in some cases and probably wouldn't in other cases. that he might just denounce it, some of the stuff that's in the Pali text right now. So, I mean, that kind of thing, there's always going to be a certain amount of skeptical doubt with regard to that sort of thing, because, I mean, it's not possible to know for sure what the Buddha originally taught. And I'm just not like a dogmatist, like a lot of Asian Buddhists who are born into an Asian culture. You know, they were raised as Buddhists from the time they were toddlers. You know, they have no doubt at all. It's like this medieval kind of mindset with regard to understanding Buddhism. But a Westerner, modern Westerner, it just doesn't work for us. Or I guess there are some, I've met a few Western monks who just believe everything the way like a born Asian Buddhist would believe it. But we Westerners, I mean, we're more eclectic. We've got sort of a broader understanding. We've learned lots of things before we learn Buddhism that are like beyond Buddhism, and you can't just reject all of that, even especially if a lot of it makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I mean, most of the time I wasn't having doubts about the Buddhist teachings, just because I wasn't thinking about the Buddhist teachings in that sense. You know, I'd just be meditating or, you know, taking a bath or something. But I assume that's not what Austin was talking about. I mean, when you're in a deep meditative state, I mean, you see the value of Dhamma in a just a deep experiential way that, I mean, you're just grateful, you know, you're thankful for it, even though it's just this worldly phenomenon. It's a sankhara, and it's not perfect. You know, it's impermanent, and it has changed since the Buddha was speaking his Dhamma, you know, at the time. I mean, it's very different now. The Sangha is very different now. But I mean, real Dhamma is in there, and if you're practicing it, you're going to find more Dhamma than you're going to find in books. You know, you're living the life, and you're meditating, and you know, you're doing what you're supposed to do as a good monk and all that. Then you're going to get benefits from it, and it's going to be, you know, they're just going to be obvious. And then if you got any sensitivity at all, you're going to be just overwhelmed with gratitude much of the time. But yeah, this question could be interpreted in different ways. But yeah, in certain ways, I mean, there's always necessarily going to be a certain amount of doubt, just because you can't really know certain things for sure. So it's going to be a kind of skeptical doubt. But just the essence of it, yeah, I don't have any doubts about that. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here, and this is from Maximin. And I can think of at least 2 Roman emperors named Maximin. Neither one of them very good, but we'll just assume this person is not one of them. Maximin says, "How often did you go to the doctor for basic checkups, or the dentist when you were a monk? How about before you were a monk? I know it sounds trivial, but I've felt really conflicted with whether or not I should get health care. Feels like enrolling in a scam where I pay a third of every paycheck to health insurance companies just in case I get some acute illness or need dental care someday. I feel like they're only willing to exist so they can make a profit off of people's fear of bodily decay or sustaining beauty. I'm young and seemingly healthy. Should I just risk it and not pay health insurance?" Well, if it was up to me, I wouldn't have any health insurance. Or it'd just be like, maybe get like $5 deducted out of my paycheck per week for like accident insurance or something like that. But yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, you went to the doctor if you had a broken bone or if you thought maybe you were dying. Those would be the 2 reasons you'd go to a doctor. And the rest of the time, I mean, you just tough it out. You know, you get better if you can buy some medicine at the store, then you do that. But we got to the main question here. How often did I go to the doctor for basic checkups or the dentist when I was a monk? It was 0. I just didn't go for basic checkups or go to the dentist for like teeth cleaning or checkups like that. It was, if I got sick, like I was hospitalized with malaria twice. So I didn't have much choice with regard to that. I was hospitalized with what one doctor called amoebic hepatitis. He said that dysentery amoebas had invaded my liver. And I was very sick. I was in the hospital for that one too. So if I got really sick, then yeah, I'd wind up going to a doctor. But there were lots of doctors that came to see me. There was one doctor, bless his heart. He was an interesting one. I wouldn't let him come anywhere near me with a scalpel, but he volunteered to be my doctor if I ever needed any kind of medical care. He'd donate it. And I mean, he was not a very skillful doctor. Like one time, he sent me a tetanus vaccine. I can't remember exactly why, but he sent me a tetanus vaccine, and it said right on the label, it must be refrigerated. And he sent it to me like in the middle of the hot season. It's like 90 degrees, this stuff. And it took like 2 days to get to me. And just sent me a hypodermic syringe, just like, have at it. And it's like, yeah, there's no way. Yeah, and like I said, I wouldn't let him come near me with a scalpel. But he was an interesting anthropological study, this doctor. And this is not answering the question at all, but it is interesting that, I mean, he was kind of a womanizer. He was married, but was a womanizer. You know, he had like girlfriends in addition to his wife. And also, the most interesting thing about him was he just had like these compartments to his mind, and he had like the religious compartment in his mind. And it was like a personality shift. He would adopt what, what's his name? Caulfield, in The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield. He calls the Holy Joe voice. Yeah, he would just get this totally different tone of voice, and he'd almost go like into a trance state when he'd be like chanting Buddhist texts or just reciting stuff for ceremonies and so forth. But for the most part, he was just like your standard rascally kind of guy. But he was very religious and very superstitious too. But getting back to go to the doctor for basic checkups or the dentist, yeah, it was. I only went to the dentist when my teeth would get broken, which did happen a few times in Burma. There's rocks in the food. You bite into a rock and you can break your teeth, and that happened to me a few times. But yeah, so when I was a monk, I went when there was some kind of emergency requiring me to go, or sometimes doctors would just come to see me and offer, you know. But one time I got really bad bronchitis, and I just happened to meet this like respiratory specialist who gave me some medicine for it. But yeah, as a general rule, I've got a fairly good constitution. So yeah, I didn't go to the doctor or the dentist unless there was something that really needed some immediate fixing. Let's see. Yeah, health insurance. I mean, insurance really is a case of betting against yourself. To some degree, it's required by law, like auto insurance and so forth. But really, personally, I wouldn't get any kind of insurance other than just like really cheap insurance that there's a good chance you're going to get a benefit from it. Like I do have free dental insurance. No, it's not free. It's just a few bucks a week. So just in case. But it is true that insurance is a case of betting against yourself. You are literally wagering that something bad is going to happen to you. And from a karmic point of view, I think it increases the odds that something bad is going to happen to you. So let's see here. I'm young and seemingly healthy. Should I just risk it and not pay health insurance? Well, I mean, if you've got a fairly solid constitution and, I mean, you don't have a really dangerous job and you do have a certain amount of money so that, let's say, if you break a tooth or some such, you get a cavity, you can just go and pay for it. That's what I did before I was a monk. I never had health insurance before I was a monk. In fact, I never really had health insurance until, I mean, when I'd be working, sometimes you just automatically have workers' compensation that you're paying into. It's that kind of a deal now. The whole time I was a monk, I had no insurance. I didn't even bother to get vaccines, or, and maybe I shouldn't say that word on YouTube, but just get any kind of shots or anything before going to Burma. People are saying, well, you really should get the what is it, encephalitis shot, or some kind of meningitis shot or something. I just didn't get any kind of vaccines or anything before I went to Burma, and I was fine. I mean, people in America are freaking out about drinking water and so forth, and I was just drinking water filtered through a cloth coming out of a creek. One place where I lived, the creek water was kind of a greenish color and tasted like milk, and I just drank it and I was fine. And then again, you talk about, I'd talk to doctors sometimes in Burma. It's like, yeah, I mean, Burmese dogs drink the water, but they don't live very long. Your odds are increased, I guess. But I mean, the main thing from a Buddhist point of view is if you're protecting Dhamma, Dhamma protects you. Like, for example, when a monk goes for alms round, he has to accept alms from anyone who's offering alms in good faith. They can have leprosy. They can just have this really awful cold. I've had people, like little kids. There's this one little kid. He looked like the feral child on the Road Warrior. I mean, any of you who watch the old Mad Max movies, and he'd just be like coughing into this food, just covered with filth, just wild hair and everything. And then he put it into my bowl, and a monk is not allowed to say no. He's supposed to just accept it with equanimity. And, people with leprosy, I had one woman, she blew her nose with her hand and just kind of flung the snot, and then used that same hand to put food into my bowl. And the monk, he's not allowed to make faces. You just have like the poker face. You accept it attentively and you just move on. I mean, you're not required to eat it, but it's all going to get mixed together anyway. So yeah, I've got a lot of horror stories with regard to going for alms round and getting weird, icky food in my bowl. And you're not allowed to say anything. Like sometimes little old ladies, bless their hearts, the village ladies, their eyesight's going bad. They don't have glasses. They don't see that the piece of cake they're putting into your bowl is just swarming with these little ants. So they put the ant swarming food into your bowl, and you've got to like stand there, perfectly walk a few steps so the little old lady doesn't see what you're doing. And you're just like picking the ants out of your food before you continue so that they don't just get buried underneath everything else. But I think I've strayed away from Maximin's question here. So yeah, I do consider insurance to be a case of betting against yourself. That the insurance companies have like they're like casinos where the odds are in their favor. They're going to make a profit. And I mean, I've always valued freedom over security, and I've always been willing to take my chances. And I mean, if something really awful happens to you, then that's just too bad, It's just the way it is. But when you have a woman in your life, women tend to be less risk. They're more risk averse than men are. They're more interested in safety and security and comfort than like an ex-professional ascetic is. So, I mean, I'm not going to give you health advice. I'm not going to tell you that you should or shouldn't get health insurance, but it would depend on your own circumstances and so forth. But if you're young and healthy and you don't have a particularly dangerous job, and you do have enough money that you can cover everything except for the worst disasters, then I would say you probably really don't need it. Unless, of course, it's like the law that you have to have it. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Tig. And Tig says, have you seen The Wolf of Wall Street? And if you have, what is your opinion of it? I assume that's a movie, The Wolf of Wall Street. And no, I have not seen a movie called The Wolf of Wall Street. A long time ago, I saw a movie that was just called Wall Street. With, what was it, Michael Douglas in it? And Charlie Sheen, I think. And it was not a really impressive movie. The only thing that really stands out for me is that there were two musical pieces in the soundtrack that were from David Byrne and Brian Eno's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, which really impressed me. And of course, on the old Gilligan's Island show, Thurston Howell III was known as the Wolf of Wall Street. So I did see Thurston Howell III on Gilligan's Island, but I don't think that that's what Tig is talking about here. And since I haven't seen the movie at all and really could only just make wild, vague guesses about what it's about, I think I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Mara Maid Mahayana. And Mara Maid Mahayana says, who will win the battle for followers, Theravada or Mahayana? Well, I really don't think that it's probably not very accurate to refer to it as a battle for followers. It's not really a battle. It might be a certain competition, although usually a Theravada monk, let's say, a Theravada teacher he's not really competing consciously against Mahayana teachers or Mahayana monks. It's like, how could we get more converts than the Zen people? I've never come across anything like that. I'm sure it exists out there, but yeah, it's not really. I don't really see it as a competition. But who will get more followers, Theravada or Mahayana? Yeah, that's a question that I really don't know the answer to. I assume, but just because there's more Mahayana Buddhists than Theravada Buddhists, that there'll be more Mahayana converts, more Mahayana followers than Theravada converts or Theravada followers. But, better a good Zen practitioner than a bad Theravada practitioner, and better a good Theravada practitioner than a bad Zen practitioner. So, a good person who is sincere is going to do pretty good with regard to just about any spiritual tradition. And if it doesn't get him far enough, then let's hope he has enough wisdom and enough open-mindedness to try something else. But with regard to the question, who will win the battle for followers? First of all, I don't really consider it to be a battle. And second, it's indeterminate, I guess. You can't really know for sure. You could just guess. And Theravada is making, progress in the West, although much of that progress is like progressive progress with like queer Buddhism and retreats for people of color and retreats for white people so that they can be more aware of their inherent racism and white privilege and so forth, which is just cultural Marxism with some Buddhist flavoring added. So, yeah, just time will tell on that one, I guess. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. We really didn't get a whole lot of questions this time, largely because the usual place for submitting questions was removed from YouTube. So this one's from Mama. And Mama says, what happens to people when they die if they haven't been exposed to any religion? So, if a good person dies, then, going from the point of view of Theravada Buddhism, that, if you're a good person, let's say you love your neighbor, you always try to tell the truth, you don't steal, you're faithful to your wife, you try to be a good person, even though you're not really a member of any religion. Let's say you're born in communist China or something where religion is frowned upon, and you're too far out in the sticks to really get much of an intensive indoctrination into communism. So, you're just kind of a secular humanist by default. And if you, like I said, if you're a good person, you tell the truth, you try to, you're generous, then you're going to get a good rebirth. If you're a good person, you're going to get a good rebirth. If you're a bad person, you're going to get a bad rebirth, regardless of what religion you follow. So, yeah, I really don't have much use for any religion that says if you don't belong to our religion, you're going to burn in hell forever and ever. Like the Quran says that, or the Book of Mormon says that. If you don't follow this stuff, and some of it's really hard to believe, but if you don't follow it, you're going to burn in hell forever and ever. And I really do not have much use for that. And also, I don't have much use for the whole idea of like Christians, for example, aren't necessarily good. They're just forgiven. It's like all you got to do is just believe in this, this Hebrew carpenter turned miracle rabbi who lived in the early Roman Empire and who created the entire universe and is the only begotten Son of God. All you got to do is believe in him and you're going to go to heaven. And I mean, I don't have much use for that either, that sort of thing. Even like any kind of Buddhist equivalent of that or Buddhist analog to that, I really don't have much use for that. So, I mean, what it just boils down to is just the quality of your character. If you're a good person, then you'll have a good rebirth. If you're a bad person, you'll have a bad rebirth. Just regardless of the religion you follow or don't follow. And that's it. That was the last question. And so, there you go. That's number 81. And if you've got any questions, anything that you think I can answer, maybe not with regard to watching movies, because I haven't really watched a whole heck of a lot of movies. But if you got a question that you think I can answer, just feel free to leave them in the comments below. And bear in mind that I am now on Rumble. And I'm probably not going to be posting a whole lot of my really old stuff onto Rumble just because it's such a daunting task that I even kind of petered out on uploading all of my stuff from BitChute or the stuff I did with Brian Rue before I was uploading onto my BitChute channel and my YouTube channel. So there's still lots and lots of videos that I've done with Brian Rue, even the ones that are safe for YouTube, that just aren't on YouTube because we did so many of them, and I just kind of lost steam in uploading them. Although I guess I should get back to it sooner or later because there are a lot of videos, old videos that I have done that just aren't on YouTube yet. And I suppose I shouldn't wait until I just get totally banned from YouTube for just saying something that is against their terms of service or something. So I guess that's it. And yeah, bear in mind that I'm on Rumble now, and feel free to hit like if you like this, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, if you consider this to be of any value. If my answering questions on Buddhism and meditation and so forth are of any value to you, then you are very welcome to subscribe. And feel free to look at the URL links below, including the books I have for sale on Amazon, which includes my Rumble link too now. And be happy.